so happy to be here and see so many women at the audience. You are the majority. Um, so I'm going to be speaking about the topic of AI in context of typography and a bit about myself. I'm Marianna. I'm Polish, but I live in Greece. And full disclosure, I'm not an AI expert. I'm more as a user and thinker. And my background is actually in font development, so type design and font engineering. I do also lettering, calligraphy. And so currently I work as a contractor program manager, specializing in complex font development projects. And what I mean by complex projects is that I do work a lot with variable fonts. These are basically fonts that have many styles packed into one style, and you can interpolate between styles. The given change in style or function is assigned to an axis, and the user can then access that via support in text editor or another app. One of the biggest projects I've worked so far is Google Sans Flex. I was a part of a big team of talented people who made this font happen. We have 6 variation axes there: weight, width, slant, optical size, roundness, and grade. And in a way that the font format is defined with every added axis, mostly sources multiply. So on average, 200 plus master sources are needed to be drawn to support such a big design space. And by design space, I mean that imaginary space of the styles and their relationships. So each source is like your traditional static font. That's what I mean by complex. There could be also multiple scripts projects and stuff like that. Other examples of complex font projects are parametric fonts. This is not a project I worked on, but just to show you a scale on which font project can take. Because it might seem like such a small thing, but you see in this diagram I generated, there are user-facing or user-friendly axes, like the ones we are already familiar with, weight or width, but then there are also parametric axes. Parametric axis is where we take a look at what changes happen to the letter form when we adjust, for example, weight or optical size or width, and we break those changes into the smallest possible ones, to elemental changes. And often we have to break them by glyph group because if we zoom in, the uppercase changes differently and so on. So it's a lot of data. There's a lot of things to control for. In this type of projects, as font developers, we are exploring what is possible at the edges of font technology, often working with cutting-edge tools or making them for the project. So obviously, because of my work, I'm interested in stuff like system science, complexity theory, tooling, and of course also AI tooling. And this talk is not intended to be an exhaustive industry analysis of if it comes to AI in type. This is more of a personal overview of AI projects and tools that I stumbled upon. Are we good with the sound now? Okay. I didn't realize. That sounds better. Okay, so if you know more font tools that are AI-based and are fun, please share with me. So, okay, let's start. An obvious problem to look at that comes to my mind is font discovery when we think about fonts and AI. So designers often want to know what font is this when they see some text in a photo or a screenshot. This is helpful in font discovery because you can upload a piece of lettering and this tool can help you find similar fonts. But identifying typefaces from images is hard. Fonts can look similar, be distorted, or used in noisy settings like billboards, signage. So there is a value in building AI system that can recognize fonts from images and not just to tell you the exact one, but suggest visually similar fonts too. This is Deep Font project, and what they did is they built a big data set called Adobe VFR. It includes synthetic data, text rendered using known fonts, and real-world images like signs, posters that are harder to label. They used a CNN model trained to recognize fonts. But the issue was that CNNs trained only on synthetic data don't generalize well to real-world noisy data. So to bridge the domain gap, they use sort of a trick, an auto encoder that learns to extract useful visual features from unlabeled real-world images to simplify everything. This helps the model better understand natural font appearance, even if it was trained mostly on synthetic images. Then they, of course, made it efficient and compressed model. And they achieved actually very impressive 80% top 5 accuracy, meaning the right font is usually in the top 5 suggestions. It also provides a font similarity score useful for recommending similar styles. FontJoy is a tool that helps generate font pairings. Think about picking a headline font, a body font, or maybe a subheading, a set that looks good together. I don't know how many of you experienced that, but picking fonts can be hard. Some combinations definitely feel awkward, others just click. We know that in most cases, two similar and two different combinations don't work well. So FontJoy is just a type of a project that uses machine learning to help automate and guide this decision. They use machine learning to mimic a designer's instinct for balance and contrast in building font hierarchy. It borrows a technique from natural language processing, word embeddings, and applies it to fonts. So instead of mapping fonts based on meaning, it learns to map fonts based on visual style. Think of it like a map in high-dimensional space. Fonts that look similar end up closer together. Fonts that have stylistic contrast, like geometric sans or a handwritten script, end up further apart. This vector space becomes a playground for font pairing. Which ones feel harmonious? Maybe you want more contrast or tension. You could play around it. All right. So similar tools can be used also to tag a given library of fonts by a certain foundry, publisher, distributor, or reseller. And also those tags can be used then to help users discover the fonts in those libraries. They can be very, very large, and definitely font discovery there, it's a big problem. How do we expose more data to the users or more data that they want or look for? Okay, so next obvious one is letter generation. And this is one project that I find very interesting. It's a project called Other Ways by Linda Hinz. This project investigates new methods for designing type by shifting focus from traditional outline drawing to parameter-driven frameworks. So instead of defining every contour, the designer shapes proportions, slants, stroke endings, and other high-level features, inviting more experimental, systemic thinking in type design. So the project explores two main approaches: skeleton-based, where letters are built from skeletal strokes using code, JavaScript. The system interprets structure to generate final forms. And then area-based, which starts with hand-drawn sketches, and then AI tools add materiality, as Linda calls it, so texture, shape, feel, and so on. While static for now, this method has also a dynamic potential, for sure. Many image generators now support generating ideograms, letters and lettering pieces, or logo-based on language input. Here's one from Deep Dream Generator. It's surprisingly good. And this is another example of a lettering focus tool. So that's one is from Adobe. User can experiment with different decorative lettering styles, so they can apply different effects. This is a project by Vera van den Zeep, and she's doing a lot of interesting stuff with AI and computational typography. This is not an AI project per se. Here, the algorithm is extracting the skeleton of the letter and then applying this as a vector effect on the input fonts. But I find that it's not too far from having tools like that being embedded in AI tooling for font generation. Another project that it's not an AI project, it's a project from the Underwear Foundry, and they also have a lot of interesting projects that I recommend you checking out. They depend heavily on font technology and code. So here is how they try to represent writing in digital means, and I think they do it in a very interesting way. Okay, then we have font finishing. It's a big task in font development and font engineering. It's sort of one step behind the font generation, which can be based on the language input, like generate sans serif fonts, or inspirational input, say, give me a font that fits this painting. Here we provide few glyphs, and then the AI tool is asked to finish the font, just like a ghost type designer or font developer would. So glyph generation. I was working on something totally different, and where I was working with ChatGPT, and it was like, "Hey, by the way, do you want me to generate a visual based on your question?" And I was like, "Why not? Bring it on." And this is what it came up with. And the second letter, it's a hallucination on the topology of the letter, so the construction of the letter. It just got a little too creative here. It's fun. It has like a childlike explorative energy, but it's not too useful. And that's quite a problem, especially for Latin fonts compared to CJK fonts, Chinese, Korean, Japanese, where we have more glyphs that build the writing system. Latin has them less, so we struggle a bit with training data, right? And creating high quality vector fonts is a complex task. So traditional methods rely on raster images if we think about glyph generation, which lack scalability and precision. The challenge is to develop a system that can automatically and efficiently generate vector fonts. This is a screen grab from an AI font tester by Philip Paldia. He's working on a PhD in this area and was kind to meet with me and chat about that. He uses here the idea of the font skeleton to limit hallucinations. So you can see pretty reasonable results with a limited data set. Still, you see some undesirable artifacts, kinks. I know it's a work in progress. And also, I would like to mention the font generation benchmark project. It's available on GitHub. Imagine you're starting to work on an AI model that can generate fonts. You'd want to know what's already out there, right? So this project serves as a comprehensive map of the landscape, detailing various AI font generation endeavors since 2010. It catalogs numerous projects, each evaluated across many distinct factors. This includes the tasks addressed, like transfer or interpolation, input and output types, encoding methods, model architectures, and more. For each project, it notes the underlying technologies, transformers, autoencoders, and diffusion models, and the dataset used, providing a clear view of the technology guide choices made. It also records how each model output was assessed, whether through quantitative measures or qualitative user studies. It also highlights whether type designers were involved in the development. So that's very nice, well-organized repository, and it could help us understand the current state. Yes, this is a really, really nice project called DeepVec Font from 2021, and I think still in development. This project is about generating high-quality vector fonts using AI. And what makes it special is how it combines two kinds of visual data, raster images and vector outlines. Here's the idea. Raster images give the model a big picture, how the letter looks overall. And then vector outline gives it precision, the actual curves and strokes. By combining these two modalities, the model gains a comprehensive understanding of font characteristics. So how it actually generates fonts, they treat it like a sequence modeling problem, if I understand it correctly, kind of like how we predict the next word in a sentence, but here it's predicting the next point or curve in a glyph outline. So the model learns how glyphs are constructed step by step, capturing the order and structure of strokes. They also use differentiable rasterization. That means the model can convert its vector predictions back into images and compare them with real letters, which allows the whole system to be trained end to end. So it's a pretty impressive result. It can successfully generate vector fonts that are visually pretty comparable to human design fonts, and it does so more efficiently than earlier systems. So as I said, I like this approach because it bridges that gap between image-based and vector-based font generation, sort of paving the way for more advanced tools. It highlights the potential of deep learning in creative and design-oriented applications. So a little recap on some of my thoughts on generative font tools. A good AI font system should know that the font has, glyph has a skeleton. It needs a little bit type design knowledge. Group glyphs interrelate, that type is used across script sizes and devices, and that it's a part of a feedback loop. And then the tool chain, and I wish I could tell you more. We use a lot of general AI tools, like, to support coding and development of the tools. But these are like basically the tasks, sorry, that we do in font engineering, right? So we need to make sure that we adhere to standards, and sometimes we have to um, represent a specific, like make a font work well in a specific environment. As the fonts get bigger, we do need to take care of compression as well. We have to make sure the shaping works. And there are many, many things that, especially in more complex scripts than Latin, could, be developed with the help of AI tools. So I'm looking forward to what's coming. And now, we will zoom out a little bit and think of typography as a bigger system. So that's all very useful when thinking of AI in context of type. And that's how I like to think whenever we have an issue in a project or whenever we start. So typography, in my opinion, should be seen as a complex adaptive infrastructure for communication. Today, we increasingly work with continuous typographic spaces through variable fonts, parametric designs, representative design, and as we talked about, the generative type systems. This calls for a new mindset. Instead of asking, is this style well designed? We now ask, how does it adapt? How does it respond? What patterns emerge when it's used across different contexts? So systemic thinking gives us the tools to ask deeper questions. How can design intent scale across many instances in a font or in a font system? How do we build font systems that are not just flexible, but intelligent, contextual, and adaptive through relationships, feedback, emergence, and rather than just like fixed outputs? So also, how do we test, review, and understand these complex font systems as wholes? That's, as I said, when we have 200 masters, 200 sources, and all this relationship between them, like how do we test that? I see typography not as an isolated act, but as a part of something much bigger. So we're going to have a closer look at the symbolic system, and we begin here with like 6 foundational nodes. Typography is shaped for and by the user. It operates within culture. It relies on technology. It carries ethical weight. It impacts and is impacted by the environment. Once we see typography this way, the boundaries between design, culture, and other disciplines begin to blur, and new possibilities open up. It's interesting for me to see what lies in between. So let's explore that. Maybe we can define or discover a human experience zone. Typography lives in the body, in the brain, in our perception, personality even. We know from legibility research that we read not just with our eyes, but with our attention, our cognition, and emotion. All this affect how we connect with a visual message. So typography is embodied. And somewhere in between all of this, we have technology. Technology shapes what typography can do and what it can't. It defines how data moves, how interaction happens, how functions are designed, and sometimes how they're limited. And fonts shape culture in quiet but powerful ways. Whose fonts do we use? Who is represented? Who gets left out? And what gets prioritized? And behind every glyph, there is human labor, often invisible but real. Fonts don't make themselves. Even the conditions under which they're made are part of this story too. So then comes the ethical realities of our craft, and I think it's especially important as we coming into the AI era. Typography is not natural. So as I said, it can include, it can exclude. It can reinforce old power structures or open space for new voices. So we have to ask, what glyphs are we encoding as a, when we really zoom out, right? Which languages and cultures are supported? And how do we think about sharing? Is our mindset one of scarcity and hoarding, in digital and design worlds, or stewardship and collaboration? Even sustainability belongs here. Can we design in ways that reduce waste, that respect the material, networks, and energy that carry our work into the world? The same principle applies to technology and AI. It applies to every font user. It applies to how we build the tools that our culture depends on. So yes, let's bring it a little bit in context of AI. This is a quote completely from a different context, but it resonates deeply with me. We must acknowledge that data represents real people. People should not be treated as passive sources to be mined, but as sovereign participants. Consent is a relationship. Every person has the right to control their digital identity and data. It's a reflection of their beliefs, behavior, language, community, and expression, and that also applies to fonts and visual typographic information. So here are a few of my thoughts on the permission. So no designer, researcher, or system can assume what's best for a user or a culture as we design, especially when working with marginalized communities. Assumptions equal bias. So even a well-meaning developer must not act without permission. Even if an AI project aims to help, like working on accessibility or education, it must respect the agency of the people whose data powers it. So there is a danger in justifying unauthorized actions, right? They would have said, yes, we've helped them. But the true permission must be direct, informed, and explicit. In the context of AI, that means transparent data sourcing, opt-in collection and reuse, legibility of participation. So people need to know what they're contributing to. In many parts of the world today, participation in society demands digital access, as we know, through a phone, computer, bank account, email address. You can't apply for a job, register for a school, or sometimes even pay rent without logging into something. That means when the biggest platforms ask for consent for data, it's not really a free choice. You either accept their terms or you're excluded from life as we know it. This isn't permission. It's compliance under necessity. When access to basic social infrastructure is locked behind walls of non-negotiable terms, the notion of informed, voluntary consent becomes an illusion, a fiction. Especially stark when you consider that not all people have the literacy or time to read terms of service and things like this. So as we develop the systems and work on them, we really have to, be honest and look at this as well. And yeah, AI promises speed and scale, but we have to be aware of hidden biases. So that inclination or prejudice for or against one person or a group, and also in other meanings, a systematic distortion. Because if we train the AI on typographic systems that already marginalize certain voices, scripts or aesthetics, we are not preserving bias. We are multiplying it, making it faster, harder to detect, and harder to undo. So it's important to recognize that we are not outside of the system. We are part of the system that generates, validates, and evolves typography. And for that reason, we need to practice self-inquiry. We need to know ourselves, know our biases and weaknesses, so we don't embed them into the systems and culture we create, or at least we try to do the least harm. So when I typed beautiful script into this example, an AI image generation tool, this is what came up. Beautiful script. And well, it's sort of nice, but also boring. And I cannot help by wondering whose writing is being called beautiful here, whose isn't even into the data set. We again are going into something centered around English and Latin scripts. So if typography is how we shape language, what kind of language systems do we want the AI to learn from? I also asked an AI model to generate an ugly font, and it gave me something that looks like a graffiti, right? That's not an innocent stylistic choice. Because AI doesn't have taste, it learns patterns from data. And somewhere in those massive data sets, graffiti got coded as ugly, mess, even danger. So when an AI calls graffiti ugly, it's not just a style preference. It's reflecting a long history of social, cultural bias baked into our institutions, the kind that erases certain voices, aesthetics, and histories. Marginalized communities use graffiti and street art as tools for social commentary and empowerment. Graffiti and street art are not merely acts of vandalism, but serve as powerful mediums for marginalized communities to assert their presence and challenge social norms. These art forms provide a voice to those often unheard, allowing them to express their identities and experiences. There is a very nice research article between art and crime, graffiti and street art in neoliberal Los Angeles. If you're more interested, I put a link there. So I wonder then, if AI treats graffiti as ugly, what else is it misreading? Whose voices are being excluded from our typographic future or biased against? What else is hiding in the shadows? Now let's talk about another kind of bias, one that shows up when we use prompts like feminine typeface, which please don't use such tags. This is just an exploration. It sounds harmless at first, but see what happens here. It interpreted that label through a narrow cultural lens, flowing strokes, pastel colors, and a calligraphic cursive style. I have a problem with that because it's flat and limiting. And that's not a coincidence. It's a reflection of stereotypes baked into the training data. Also, I've seen font exploration tagging systems that include a tag for feminine type styles, but not masculine. So everything else becomes the default. Neutral is assumed to be masculine, and femininity becomes this decorative deviation. It's like saying there's type and then there's feminine type, which reinforces the idea that male coded design is the norm and everything else needs a label. But femininity, like any identity, is not a style. It's not a flourish. It's not something you can reduce to swashes or pink or actually transfer to typography. If you ever seen the Atlas of Beauty by Michaela Norak on Instagram, you know what I mean. It's a photographic project that celebrates women from around the world. And the point is, there is no one way to be feminine. It's diverse. It's shaped by context, culture, and personal experience. So when we prompt an AI to create a feminine font and it responds with calligraphy, roses, and lace, we have to ask, whose version of femininity is this and who gets left out? And the fix isn't just better data, it's better teams, diverse teams, more women, more non-binary designers, more people from different cultures at the table, not just represented in the data, but shaping the tools themselves. Because no matter how advanced AI becomes, it can't teach itself empathy. That has to come from us, from the way we listen, build, and collaborate. So the next time we design with AI, let's not just think about style. Let's think about which stories these tales carry and whose stories get to be seen. So yeah, preventing harmful bias is a systemic issue. And if we're going to build generative font systems, we need to do it with intentional diversity and with human collaboration at the core. That also means looking beyond Latin writing systems, Latin fonts. Don't assume Euro-American styles are neutral. Build logic that respects how different scripts connect or stack in your software and give people, not just algorithms, a voice in the loop. Bias can't be fully automated away, of course, but we can systematically manage it if we build it with care. And some other biases to notice. Control bias happens when the ease of implementation drives design decisions, not necessity, not cultural context, not typographic need. In type design, this means that features that are easy to interpolate or behave predictably in engines get support. But those that are less predictable, harder to script, or don't fit the Latin logic often get deprioritized or dropped entirely. One clear example is Nastaliq script, the traditional writing style for Persian Urdu. It works diagonally and vertically with complex ligature logic, far outside the assumptions of Latin-based typesetting. Most rendering engines assume flat baselines and left-to-right shaping. They weren't built to handle sloping, cascading layouts. And because Nastaliq is harder to control, it's often either rendered incorrectly or excluded. The same thing happens with many tall scripts, that is, scripts with vertically stacked consonant clusters. Think Tibetan, Malayalam, Burmese, or Thai in some of its traditional orthographies. These scripts rely on stacking, not just diacritics but full syllable components. Technically, Harfbas or other shaping engines do support this behavior, but layout systems like web engines or mobile UIs often fail to render them properly, and then it's really difficult to scale the product into these geographies. Line heights break, bounding boxes clip, and designers are forced to simplify or flatten their font designs. So what happens? The features are harder to control, that are harder to control for get left out, not because they're not important, but because the system doesn't make space for them. Yeah. So systemic bias happens when a system reinforces what it already knows how to handle. It feeds itself the same kind of input, so the same kinds of output keep getting supported. In typography, this means Latin works well and English works well because everything was built around it. Layout engines, naming conventions, even the design tools themselves. Meanwhile, complex or displaced scripts fall through the cracks, and there are many, many, many of them in the world. Not because they're invalid, they fall through the cracks, but because the system doesn't recognize them as normal to the system. So yeah, that's an example of a systemic bias in a feedback loop, right? Let's say a native script often tied to a culture, religion, or oral tradition was displaced during colonial or missionary periods, and in its place, Latin script was introduced as the official writing system. That Latin-based orthography became dominant in education, administration, and eventually digital systems. But the original script doesn't disappear. It may survive in informal education, handwritten documents, or cultural practices. Today, communities want to revive and digitize these scripts. They want to read, write, and reclaim them in modern media. But here's a trap. Unicode, that system that encodes digital scripts, requires evidence of active ongoing use. And yet these scripts can't be used in digital world until they are encoded. So this is self-scaling loop of systemic bias. That what is not visible digitally is treated as it doesn't exist and therefore doesn't qualify to be seen. That leaves, no usage, no encoding, no usage. So that's an example. It's a big digression. I do recognize that. But I think as we work with AI, we really, really have to look at biases. They're really getting amplified there. So that's like an example of how we would move away from that problem with the encoding of the marginalized scripts, right? So we need seeding mechanism. We need to legitimize scripts based on intent and community readiness. Accept proxy forms of evidence and invest in infrastructure very early, like keyboards, fonts, and input methods. So this is coming back to my little model of the typographic system, which is not complete, and maybe it shouldn't, because living systems are always evolving. When we look at typography through this lens, we see it as a living system, and I find it helps me to recognize those biases, unhelpful patterns, and also helpful patterns and places to explore if I look at my job in this context. Typography is not a machine, and typeface is not just an object. And this is true to many, many digital data sets. When we start seeing the world as truly interconnected system, something changes. If I recognize that typography in your corner of the world matters as much as typography in mine, and you can replace that with technology or whatever you want, because we are all connected, then maybe I can start to care differently. I act differently. I care about supporting languages and cultures that need preservation and empowerment, not from a place of superiority, but with sensitivity and respect. So that's the real hope behind systemic thinking, I think. Not just better fonts and typography and software, but stronger connections, deeper respect, and typography that serves not just design, but life itself. And we could easily go deeper into philosophical or even spiritual dimension, but let's stay focused on typography. As type designers, typographers, developers, educators, we are no longer shaping just forms in the era that we're coming into. We are shaping systems and communication. We are shaping culture. So I will leave you with this thought that typography is not simple an aid in visual communication. It's how we connect, imagine, and build meaning together. Thank you. I'm gonna see if there is any question in the chat. I don't see anything. Anyone has a question or a comment? We are in very cozy setting, so feel free. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much for coming. It was really fun to explore that topic for you and present it today. Thanks.